Ahmed Aziz's Epic Year, chapters 30 and 31. Let's take a quick review of what happened in the last chapter. In chapter 29, Ahmed's father is not doing well. And now we are in book 2, page 153, chapter 30. So let's see what happens. According to the calendar on my phone, the first day of winter hadn't formally arrived. Apparently, Minnesota isn't big on formality because winter was most definitely here. I ran inside to switch from sweatshirt to my winter jacket, leaving the price tags in the bowl of keys at the front door. There was something wet on my nose, and I wiped it away. I felt it again on the back of my neck and turned around to see if Jack was playing a prank on me. He wasn't. I pulled the hood over my head, the fuzzy lining warm against my cheek. Look who thinks they're in Siberia. Jack was wearing a sweatshirt and shorts. The wetness touched my hand, and I looked around again. It's snowing, dude, said Sophie, the girl with the big feet. Haven't you ever seen snow? Now, let's just stop for a second. Remember, where did Ahmed move from, and why has he never seen snow before? Okay, think about that. In kindergarten, we cut snowflakes out of paper and taped them to our classroom windows, but they faded and turned yellow by the time we returned from winter break. Even fake snow couldn't survive in Hawaii. These snowflakes were nothing like those. They were cool and light, and my breath melted them before they could land on my tongue. Big, fat, juicy snowflakes, watching each flake float before it landed, made it hard to feel sorry for myself. I watched the green grass and the black road and the brown roofs all turn white, but each step I took left black footprint-shaped destruction, and I was back to thinking about my dad and feeling sorry for myself. I dragged myself around all morning, avoiding eye contact and conversation. By lunchtime, I felt like I had an angry black cloud drawn over my head. Carl noticed, of course. He brought up Hawaii, sunshine, and swimming pools. It's not winter that's bugging me, I wanted to yell at him. Instead, I pulled out my copy of From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler to shut him up. I was halfway through the book, but still hadn't gotten into it. Unlike Stanley from Holes, the main character in this book, Claudia, seemed like a brat. She had a father who was not in the ICU and a school where no one picked on her, but she ran away from home. I couldn't understand her. If I met her, I would have punched her. Well, probably not, but she would have deserved it. Carl, what the heck is Claudia's problem anyway? What do you mean? Why do you think she ran away? I don't know. I think she was looking for something. That sounded dumb. It's perfectly easy to search for something without running away in the comfort of your bedroom with a good meal in your belly. In fact, it's preferable. Looking for what, do you think? I don't think she knew, but my theory is that she was looking for the truth, Carl said. Ahmed, do your own homework. My turn leading the discussion was thankfully over, but Jessica had sent me multiple threatening messages reminding me to increase my participation. Someone threw a stack of newspapers on the middle of our table. It was the school newspaper. The front page covered the last game and school lunches. From Hawaii to Minnesota, there was a common thread to what fascinated us. The Cedar Valley Chatter, a school newspaper since 1927. There was no bragging or exaggeration. They called it Minnesota Nice. Any other paper would have said, best newspaper around, or best school around, but no, it was a school newspaper since 1927. Jack pressed a finger on the edge of my tray as he passed by, tipping it over. Cake smashed, spaghetti splattered, chocolate milk pooled. Another color added to my tennis shoes. Hey, Carl shouted at Jack, stop being such a jerk. I felt too tired to even wish I had a comeback. I flipped the tray over and scooped the spaghetti in. Carl scraped the cake in with his spoon. I covered the milk with my napkin. Why do you let him do that? Carl asked. I didn't bother wiping my shoes. What's the point, Carl? Carl was crouched over the cake, spoon still in hand. What's the point? What's the point? The point, my friend, is to save the innocent. He stood up, put one leg on the bench, the frosting-covered spoon in front of him like a microphone. I have witnessed an atrocity today, Carl said in his deep newscaster voice. Innocent cake chocolate milk that never hurt a fly, spaghetti limp with exhaustion. They never stood a chance. And what do the privileged say? The men and women given the resources and intelligence to fight? Do they rally in the face of this injustice? Do they bring the troops together with this singular hope of saving the voiceless? No, ladies and gentlemen, they ask today only one question. What is the point? No one laughed or cheered or noticed. It was Carl being Carl. I fake clapped and he bowed. I felt like smushed cake. I hadn't done anything to deserve the way Jack put me down, but I also guess I hadn't done anything to deserve the way Carl lifted me up. I had no appetite. I left the chatter behind and headed to class. Mrs. Garter was already at her desk, red pen in hand, making kids' lives miserable one test at a time. I tried to back out quietly before she saw me, but I was too slow. Ahmed, she called, pulling me back in. I was about to call your mother. How's your dad doing? Nothing much has changed in the last couple of weeks. Mom kept telling us we were lucky he wasn't getting worse. Somehow I didn't feel very lucky. If I sat down, I was stuck until class started. If I hung out at the door, I still had a chance. Come sit down. Too slow again. I zoned out while she talked about how she was there for me and asked me to let her know if there was anything she could do. There was nothing anyone could do. I focused my attention on rolling the newspaper on my lap into a tight tube. You know, I started that newspaper, she said. I unrolled the paper and tried to smooth it out. You did, I asked, eager to talk about anything but my dad. Wow, Ahmed, 1927. How old do you think I am? But I did write for the paper all the years I was here, she said. She took the paper from me and opened it up, covering her table. I used to be a page 2 person. That was the page that covered world news. Probably the least read section of the entire paper. The pages crinkled as she turned them. I recruited all my friends to write for the paper. All of them. The class trickled in. I wanted to move seats before the bell rang. It was bad enough being the new kid without being the new kid who was friends with the teacher. Hey, Mrs. Garter, how are you doing? Carl asked. Carl had no such worries. Doing well, Carl. Thank you so much for asking, she answered. Ahmed needs to navigate the library to do some research. Do you mind helping him sometime? I did. She folded the newspaper and held it out for me. Some very specific research, she added. Chapter 31. I met Carl at the library after school, standing in front of the encyclopedias, not knowing where to start. Dawdling. I didn't know how to tell Carl what I was looking for because I didn't know what I was looking for. I'll be right back. Carl dug through his backpack. I have to return a book. I moved to the biographies and thumbed through a book about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Never heard of her, but people will write books about anyone. Extra point if you know who RBG is. E.L. Konigsberg, that name I knew. I looked at the back flap. Did you know, it said, that Konigsberg was inspired to write her most famous book when she saw a kernel of popcorn on a chair behind a velvet rope? Who cared? I put Konigsberg and her popcorn fame back on the shelf. What are we looking for today? Carl asked. I was pretty sure Mrs. Garter wanted me to look through school newspapers. That's all I was sure of. I don't know. How do I look through old school newspapers? How old are we talking? Carl asked. That's one of the things I liked about Carl. He didn't ask why or what or when. He was just there. About 30 or 40 years old? Oh, that's easy. If you were looking for something older than that, we'd have to go to a different building. Papers from 50 years ago are still here, though. You're lucky. First time I'd been lucky in the last 6 months, for sure. He took me to a corner of the library, tucked away in the far end. There were rows of books of the same height and thickness. Some were older and bound in leather, and some were covered in plastic. There were no markings along the binding, and when I pulled one down, there were no words on the front cover. There you go, he said. All the newspapers for the past 50 years. So where's the index? How's it organized? I asked. That's where your luck runs out. The person in charge of binding them together didn't put them in any particular order. Nobody put a date or index on that thing. Carl stepped to the side and out of the way. I tried to find out how the school got its name. I gave up before I lost my sanity. They aren't even in chronological order. I rubbed the bindings, releasing a puff of dust. I wiped my hand on my jeans and coughed. Hey, you're like Claudia, Carl said, walking down the aisle and dragging his finger along the books, looking for something in the mixed-up files. And like Claudia, I was looking for answers without knowing the question. Maybe I wouldn't punch her in the face after all. So it seems like we have a tiny little